6. And so tonight, what we're going to do is just what I said. Is we're going to do a little overview of it in the middle. We're going to start with kind of like some things we should know before diving in. And then we'll end it with like the takeaways of the book. So let's dive right in. So to begin, and I've talked about this before, cannot stress it enough, but this is a book of images. This is the pictures and the things that we're going to read about and discuss and see as we like glance through the text it's you got to imagine it. Like when you read this book, it really should be experienced all in one go, like a big play that you're watching. And so I encourage you, if you can sometime, to sit down and just read it aloud quietly to yourself all the way through. It takes a little less than an hour. The young people know. I forced them to do it at one point, and we all sat down, the Eldridges, and we read it aloud together. But then also, if you look at chapter 1, look at verse 3. It says, "Blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of the prophecy and keep the things that are written in it, for the time is near." Now, some of y'all, it says, "and obeys the things that are written in it." That's what that word's talking about. That you keep, you guard, you obey the things that are written in this book. So firstly, like before we dive in, like this is a book that's meant to be obeyed. Like, you know? And I think for a lot of us, this book is really it's really strange because it is. Like it is a pretty strange book to just dive right into. And so this also will, I guess you could categorize it in the unofficial sermon series I've been doing, where it's like strange parts of the Bible, where we went through like Lamentations and the tabernacle instructions and like, I don't know, what was some of the other ones? I don't know. Song of Songs is on the list. Song of Solomon is on the list in there. Not tonight, another time. But this is like kind of one of those books that maybe is just a little bit less familiar to most of us. It's kind of obscure and strange. So hopefully tonight we're going to press in, bring some clarity, and like see what is to be obeyed here. What are we supposed to be keeping and listening to in this book? But firstly, a book of images. And then I've also like used this in like a shorter snippet, but I want to slow down and meditate on this for a moment before we dive in. I've used the example of comparing Revelation to what we have in our world today, which is political cartoons. And so I have one on the screen. Keep it nice and, politically neutral. But here on the screen, you can see our boy here sitting on in his lazy boy, his recliner, watching a TV. And if you can't read it, they've got media inputs on the TV here. It says snark, bile, hysteria, and facts. And guess which one is disconnected on the TV there? And like you all can like look at that and you get it. Like it makes sense. And it doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you're on. We're all aware that the news media kind of is like fear sells. All those things, those are flashy, like the like argumentation and arguing and like picking fights and getting a recording of that. Like that sells. That gets our attention, and it like spreads fear. And it's like it's not healthy. Like once NewsHour hit 24 hours, it's kind of been a downhill spiral from there. But enough about like that. When you look at this image behind me on the screen, like you get it, right? Because who's the guy in the chair? He's got like a bright outfit with stars and stripes. It's Uncle Sam. He's kind of like a figure that represents all of America, and he's watching his TV, and the TV is giving an output not of like things that are true, but of all these other things that kind of seek to spread fear and divide. And he's like terrified, like sitting there on his couch. Now, if we took this image, and let's say we like spun the globe, and we went all the way to like South Africa, and then we turn back the clock 2,000 years, and then we just like show it to someone, how do you think they're going to handle it? Like, is it going to make a lot of sense to them? Like, no. Like, you'd have to like give a little explanation to them, because in their world and in that time, whatever the culture was like in that day, this wouldn't make any sense. Like, why is there a man in a very like spangly outfit, like sitting there on his couch, like watching some sort of like fog machine or something like going on? Like, what's going on there? But like to all of us in the culture that we're sitting in right here today, like you can just look at that and it makes sense. You understand it. You get it. That's what the book of Revelation. Chuck, I'm feeling your pain. What's going on here? All right, there we go. That's what the book of Revelation is like. When we dive into this imagery and stuff like that, and even when you hopefully go forth, read it on your own, you're going to hit things and you're like, what? You're just going to feel that, and that's okay. Like, for instance, when it starts talking about, like, a woman that was sitting on a beast that's also sitting on 7 hills, like, going on there? Like, what's happening? And then the beast, like, devours the woman? Like, what's happening in this story? It's kind of graphic and gruesome and terrifying. But all of those images make sense to them in their day. Like when it talks about an eagle, or it talks about a beast, or it talks about animals crawling up out of the sea, they would have been familiar with this in their time and their place. And also they would have had people there to explain the things that were maybe a little more like strange or more specific to the churches as well that this is being written to. Because this is written to the church. And it's written not just to one church, but 7 churches, which we'll talk about in a minute. And the number 7 kind of implies like a holistic. 7 is like a symbolic number that means like whole or complete. So it's like it's written to 7 churches, but in a way it's also written to the whole church, is the way this book is written and structured. And so that's kind of just like first like very clear, very different thing that we got to talk about from the start is these are images. And in their day it's talking about real things that are happening around them, but it's going to be in a way and in like in symbolic images that are going to be like understood in their context, but maybe seem a little strange to us today. Does that make sense? Tracking with that so far? Hopefully, Lord willing, praying. But anyways, we'll dive in a minute. And so next question is like, well, where do these images come from? And I phrased the question, I was kind of wrestling with how to phrase this, because obviously John didn't just make up these images, but what like categories or from what place did God get the imagery that he then revealed to John for him to record and then share with others? Like it wasn't just random pictures that he was picking out to tell this story of the Revelation. There was like, it was stuff that John could understand in his day. It's stuff that the churches in his day could understand. Like they would have gotten it. And so this is a statistic from the book of Revelation that hopefully all the kids that were in the class when we went through the book could recite it to me. And they did this morning, so I know it's in there somewhere still for them. But there is about 2 to 3 references to the Old Testament per verse in the Revelation. Like that right there, that's a crazy stat. Like obviously there's not one in every verse, but sometimes there's like more than 3 or 4 within one verse. Like this thing is so dense in the way that it's compacted, and it's using all of the images of the whole story of the Bible. Like every single book of the Bible has some sort of link that's connected to the book of Revelation. You've got to be well literate in like the whole story thus far before diving in right here. And that's just like a word of wisdom, like to all of us as we approach this text, is like some people want to dive right into Revelation, you know, and they want to dive right in there and not have any lick of what's going on before or behind it in the rest of the Bible. And that's not good. That's not good. That's not what you're supposed to do. That's like, for a modern cultural example, I grew up in the era of the Marvel movies, you know. There's been like a bajillion of them now. I don't keep up with it anymore. But from like 2008 to 2019, there was a long series of theatrical releases of the superhero movies. And the very end of it, there were 2 really like, their epic conclusion. It was called like the Infinity War and then the Endgame. And both of those, it was like all of the themes from the whole entire movie series wove together, and all the storylines and characters interacted to this triumphant conclusion. And it's like, imagine if you just jumped right into those last 2 movies. Like they tell a story in themselves, but like if I only watched those, I would be like really lost in a lot of places. And that's what happens in the Revelation, because really, we might touch on it in a minute, or whenever we get towards that chapter. But this is where like stuff about like premillennialism comes in. It's like they dive right into the very last like 3 chapters of the book, like chapter 20. Like there's 22 chapters. They parachute down into chapter 20, snatch the 1,000 years and say like this is definitely 1,000 years, and it has to be 1,000 years, and then redefine everything that came before it. And you're like, well, hold on a minute. Like let's just pause. Has there been any other symbolic numbers in the letter of the Revelation? Yes, basically almost every other number that you read in the book is symbolic. And so just proceeding with caution and with humility and wisdom whenever we approach this book is that we need to be aware that like it's meant to be like I read the book of Genesis and then I read the Revelation, track with the repeated words. I read Exodus, read Revelation, Leviticus, Revelation, and all of them are just linked and woven together through the Spirit of God and through his channel through John the disciple, the apostle, in this beautiful way. That's like this triumphant, climactic conclusion, this capstone to the biblical story and the whole biblical text. It's an awesome book. Whenever we were teaching it, it's like jumped up my ranks of like favorite books. So like before it was like Genesis and now Revelation. So I guess I don't know, beginning and end of favorite books of the Bible. But yeah, just whenever we're diving in, keeping all these things in mind. Images like political cartoons. Where does he find these images? What are these images drawn from? The entire story of the Bible. 2 to 3 references per verse in this book to the Old Testament. And then lastly and finally, what's the type of genre? Now this is one that hit me when we were going through and teaching it. When we were in the classroom, I opened the floor up. I was like, what would you guys say? I was like, would be the genre of the book of Revelation, based on how the world sees it today, or how you see it too. I was like, whatever. Most of the answers were thriller, or a common one that everyone kind of agreed on was a horror. There's a very what's it called? Or there's a book series, the Left Behind series, very popular in the 70s and 80s. And it was getting a lot of its imagery from the book of Revelation and all these terrible things, and it's like a thriller horror book series, and they made a movie about it, and that's not what this is about at all. In fact, whenever you dive into this book, there's a lot of beautiful and hopeful imagery, and there are some scary parts, but as a whole, it kind of goes back and forth. There's just as much hope and powerful imagery of the victory of Christ and the victory of God, hence the title of the lesson. There's also a lot of terrifying images of judgment and destruction. But just to take a glance at kind of some of the main characters real quick that I'll show you on the screen right behind me, and some of the main, just a quick little summary of the main themes. And when I present these to you in this way, what type of genre am I describing? There's a dragon, there's a hero on a white horse, there's a damsel in distress in this book, there's a happily ever after, and they reign forever and ever. There's a kingdom that's established that they dwell in together forever and ever. What kind of series, what genre is that? What are we talking about? It's this is kind of like fairy tales or a fantasy. Something that is a story of that goes through the good guys and the bad guys and the battle that they fight out together. And then eventually it ends with the destruction of the bad guy, and then the Prince Charming and the princess get married, and they dwell forever and ever together. They ride off into the sunset. That's kind of how this book's whole entire arc flows. It starts with we meet the bride in chapters 2 and 3, the church, the bride of Christ. And then it ends with a wedding ceremony. It says, come to the wedding supper of the bride and of the Lamb. And then it's the beast and the dragon and all of his minions, they ride out and they charge into battle against the rider on the white horse. And we'll see that in chapter 19. And then they're slain and they're destroyed forever, and they're thrown into the fiery pit, and everyone who followed after them. And then it's just peace and joy and love and this eternal city that Scott was leading us songs about tonight. It's when that kind of clicked, it really helped me capture the image of what's going on here. Because there are some times when this book gets kind of scary. It gets really dark, and there's judgment and danger and intensity. And it's just the feeling, and when I saw that, it had the same feelings that I had growing up when I watched I don't know, for instance, the first one that came to mind was Sleeping Beauty. Because you had the time in the forest and the colors and the happy imagery, and then you had the evil queen in her dark tower, and every time it changed scenes, it was really dark and scary, and then it would cut back to the main story of the princess and her in the forest and all of that, and it would cut back and forth, and then there was this moment of rescue and danger, and then the witch turns into a dragon, and then the rider on the white horse kills it and throws it into the fiery pit. It's the same types of images. Because this right here, what we're going to dive into in the story of the Revelation, it's the true story. All other stories that people have tried to write throughout generations and generations are all pointing to this one. And right here, God gives John a vision of all these images of this beautiful, beautiful victory story where he brings back his bride to himself, and they live together forever and ever. And that's the story. The fancy word, technical word for this type of literature is apocalyptic. So if you were going to look it up to try to learn about what type of genre this is in the biblical lingo, it's called apocalyptic literature. And that just means it's a story arc. There's a story going on, but it's being communicated through imagery, usually in a vision or in a dream. And that's what John's experiencing, is this massive vision. The narrative starts in chapter 4, and it does not end until like the very end of chapter 22. It's all this imagistic vision that he's experiencing of the whole story of God and his redemptive plan to bring back his bride to himself and reign with and live with her forever and ever. So let's dive in. We're just going to kind of cruise right through chapter by chapter, and it's just gonna be a flyover. I have little chapter summaries, but I encourage you to dive into it on your own. And this is just an example one on the screen. Other people have different ways of organizing it. But if you want to start here and look down in your Bibles to Revelation chapter 1, let's dive right in. So here in Revelation 1, the first thing that we meet is the risen Lord. If you look in verse 9, John, it says he was a fellow partaker in the tribulation, the kingdom, and perseverance which are in Jesus. He said, I was on the island called Patmos because of the word of God and the witness of Jesus. He says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet. And that first voice that he hears, it says, write down in a scroll what you see and send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus, to Smyrna, Pergamum, to Thyatira, to Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And then he says, I turned to see the voice speaking to me, and then he turns and he saw 7 golden lampstands, and then in the middle was one like the Son of Man. And this is he's encountering the risen Lord. His eyes are like flaming fire. A sharp sword comes from his mouth. He has white robes, a golden sash. His feet are like burning bronze. And he was like the appearance of the sun. It was like this powerful boom moment. It says he fell down at his feet like a dead man. And he's picked up and he says, I got stuff for you to write down. I've got a message for the churches. And that's where we go to in the next bit. The next 2 chapters, chapters 2 and 3, is where we have those 7 churches that I just mentioned, is all of the letters that Jesus is writing specifically to them. He's speaking these words to John. John's writing them down, and then he's sending them out to the churches. If you have a red letter Bible, you'll notice all of these chapters are all red letters, because this is all Jesus' words straight from Jesus to John onto the paper to be sent out. And through these different letters, there's actually, if you could, surprise, surprise, there are actually 7 different sections to these letters. They all kind of have an intro, a conclusion, or a promise, and then they have a concluding note, a promise, a warning, admonition, criticism, praise, and then the intro statement is about Jesus' identity. So there's 7 different sections to these letters. Then there's, of course, 7 letters. And then Jesus is speaking, when he's speaking and he's described, there's 7 different descriptions of Jesus. And you could just take a guess as to how many times, if I ask you a random question about how many times is perseverance mentioned in the Revelation? 7 times. How many times is this mentioned? 7. Just go with a guess. If you're going to guess a question in Bible class I'm teaching, Jesus, God, or 7, if you guess one of those, you're probably right most of the time. So, but especially in John, just 7 is this repetition of this. It's this completion. This is the final book of Scripture. Everything's being brought to a conclusion, and he's finishing up the text, and he's also pointing us forward, hopefully, because of the victory of the Lamb. And that's where we go next. After the 7 letters to the 7 churches, the vision begins. The real imagery and all of that starts to begin. If you look at chapter 4 and verse 1, it says, after these things I looked, and behold, a door is standing open in heaven. And the first voice, who was that first voice? It was Jesus. Says that first voice which I heard that was like the sound of a trumpet speaking to me said, come up here, and I will show you what must immediately take place after these things. And then it says, immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was standing in heaven, and one sitting on the throne. Chapters 4 and 5 kind of mirror each other as it all takes place around the throne. And guess how many times we appear before this throne throughout the rest of the book? There's 7 other times. But right here at first is everyone singing praises to the one on the throne. It says in verse 4, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God the Almighty, who was and who is to come. And then look at verse 11. It says, worthy are you, O Lord our God, to receive glory, honor, power, for you created all things, and because of your will they existed and they were created. And then there's this moment in chapter 5, right in the middle of these 2 chapters, in the middle of this scene around the throne, where it says that he looks at the one on the throne, John does, and in his hand is this scroll that has 7 seals. So it's sealed up. And what that symbolizes is the plans of God that have to be, someone has to begin it. Someone has to start opening this scroll up so that God's words can go out. It's multiple times throughout the prophets, God's words are personified as going out and doing things, but they're sealed up, they're bound up. And the thing is there's no one who's able to open this scroll. That's what John says. It says there was no one in heaven, on earth, or under the earth, in the seas. No one could open the scroll. And so he starts weeping. Because here's the thing, is we can't go forward in this story until someone begins this work of opening the scroll. This has to be done. Think about any favorite story of yours. The moment where the hero steps up and does the thing that everyone's waiting on them to do. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, it's the moment where Frodo's I'll take the ring to Mordor. If I don't know, what else? Pick your genre. In Star Wars, it's the moment where Luke Skywalker is I'm going to go into space and to become like my father, become a Jedi like my father before me. It's that moment in the story where everything's waiting for the hero to do the thing that they were born to do. And then who steps on the scene in this moment? The Lamb does. And the Lamb steps on, and John is weeping because no one can open the scroll, but the Lamb appears. And it's a lamb that looks like it's slain, like it's defeated, like it's been killed. But it walks up and it takes the scroll, and then everyone falls down before the Lamb and before the one on the throne, and they start singing a new song. And look at chapter 5 and verse 9. It says, they sang a new song saying, "Worthy are you to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain and you purchased for God with your blood a people from every tribe and tongue and people and nation, and you made them to be a kingdom of priests to our God, and they will reign upon the earth." And then everything just begins to rejoice. Everything, it says, it opens up. Myriads and myriads, thousands and thousands are singing, "Worthy is the Lamb," and every created thing in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, and in the sea, and all that's in them was crying out. All of creation is rejoicing because the Lamb is opening the scroll. And then subsequently, we have in the next 2 chapters, the seals being opened. And all of these terrible things start to come out of the seals. This is one of those moments where it was really hopeful, and there's a reason why he put that scene of the throne right there at the beginning of the victory of the Lamb, because things are going to get really dark. It's going to get kind of scary. And throughout these seals, it's really terrifying as all these different riders on horses come out, the 4 horsemen. They are bringing about plague and death and war and famine. But it's we got to get through these so that we can get to the end of it and God's mission and plans can continue forward. And so then after the 7 seals, you have the 7 trumpets. And it's after you get to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seals, there's a pause, and then as they open the 7th seal, there's 7 trumpets, angels with trumpets that come out. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then there's a pause as you get ready for the 7th trumpet again. And as that last trumpet is getting ready to sound is kind of when we enter into this middle section of the book. We've gone through 2 cycles of judgment. The seals, the trumpets, they all have 7 layers. And then now here in the middle of the book is through imagery. It's like John sees a retelling of the whole story of human history, of redemptive history. What he sees in chapter 10 is he gets that scroll that's been opened up by the 7 seals, and he eats it, which is a weird imagery, but it's like he's internalizing the message of the scroll. And now he is becoming part of the mission, which is kind of an image of what all of us are. All of us who've heard the word, we've taken it in, it's become part of us. We're part of this story now. If you've been baptized into Christ, this is the world you live in now. You're part of the victory of the Lamb, and you have stuff to do. And so now as he takes in this scroll, he begins to see all of these images and these moments where it's a retelling of the victory of God. Because look over in chapter 12. Chapter 12, he says that he sees this great sign appear in heaven. There's a woman who's clothed with the sun, the moon's under her feet, and her crown on her head is a crown of 12 stars. And she was expecting. She was pregnant with a child, and she cried out, being in labor and pain to give birth. And then there was another sign in heaven, and then this is the dun-dun-dun. This is the villain shows up, the big main bad guy, the great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head were the 7 diadems. And so it's this is the giant, this is what the whole story has been pointing to. Because remember how it all began. God says to the woman, she says, through pain and childbirth, like you will bear children. And then he says to the serpent, all the way there in the very beginning, that there's going to come forth one from the woman, a child, who's going to crush your head. He's going to stomp on your head. And he's like, he's going to crush your head, but you're going to bruise his heel at the same time. And it's like, this is a vision of that coming to fulfillment. At the right moment, God sent forth His Son into the world, born by a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law. That's Galatians. And here it's like, right as Jesus is about to be born, the dragon, the serpent, is trying to devour him. And we read a little bit about that serpent in verse 9 of chapter 12. John elaborates in his vision. He says, that great red dragon, it was thrown down, that serpent of old, who's called the devil and Satan. He deceived the whole world, and he was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. This is the moment of victory. This is the moment where Christ conquers the power of the devil, and he's cast down. In John chapter 12 as well, in the Gospel of John, he says, now the hour has come for the Son of Man to be lifted up, and it's the evil one will be cast down. And this is that moment. In the victory of Christ's work on the cross, through his life and his death, his resurrection and ascension, the devil is defeated. But it's like he's cast down, but he still has things he's going to be working evil in the world. Because it was a moment of great victory, but then we're still like looking forward to the ultimate victory. This dragon is still going to be rising and causing evil. And that's this moment that John is writing this message down as encouragement for the Christians of his day. He's like, look, just because you're going to be suffering persecution, just because you're going to be struggling in this world against this dragon, it doesn't mean that the Lamb hasn't lost. It doesn't mean that Christ hasn't won. It just means that right now he's being defeated by all of you through you're Christ's body. And what happened to Christ's body? What happened to the Lamb? What did he look like? Like he was slain. He's like, all of you now are participating in that. And that's a message for all of us. Like as we're out there in the world, we're going to be suffering. Like if we're part of Christ's body, what happened to Christ's body? It suffered. And so therefore, this is a message of encouragement that this dragon is going to be fighting and trying to destroy. Christ is won, and the suffering is not in vain anymore. Like we're moving onward towards life and victory forever and ever. But we get a glimpse of this evil army that the dragon has. If you turn over to chapter 13, look at this. There's two other creatures that show up in chapter 13. So the dragon is standing on the edge of the sea, and it's that same one, the devil and Satan. And then if you look in verse, starting in verse 1, it says, John sees another beast coming up out of the sea. And it says it has 10 horns, 7 heads, and its horns were 10 diadems, and on its heads were blasphemous names. Again, strange imagery, but what's going on here is there's this beast coming up out of the sea. And so all of us should be like, well, have I ever read about a beast coming up out of the sea before in the Bible? Oh yes, if you're a Bible student, the book of Daniel. And what does that beast represent? It's like a nation. It's an evil nation that rises up out of the sea. And this is these people would be hearing this, that there's going to be political power that's under the influence of this dragon that's seeking to crush and destroy you. Because this beast that comes up out of the sea, it crushes and destroys the people of God. But look what he says. In verse 10, he says, if anyone's destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone's killed with the sword he must be killed. He says, here's the perseverance of the faith of the saints. How do you defeat the persecution of the beast that comes up out of the sea? Political power that's seeking to crush the people of God? Persevere. Stand strong. Stand fast. And then, verse 11, he sees another beast. It says, I saw another one coming up out of the earth, and it had 2 horns like a lamb, but he was talking like a dragon. So what's going on there? Well, who's the lamb in the story? It's Jesus, right? But right here it says he looks like a lamb, but what does he talk like? This beast that comes up out of the earth talks like the dragon. So it's like we've got something that kind of looks like the lamb, but it's acting like and speaking like the dragon, and it gets its power from the dragon. This is like a corrupted religious system. And what does he say is the thing that we're supposed to do to overcome this one? Verse 18, it says, look, here is wisdom. You have to have wisdom to discern. This is chapter 13, verse 18. You have wisdom to discern what this beast looks like what these corrupted religious systems look like. And during their time in this day, powers of Rome were on the rise, and the fastest growing religious cult was the worship of Caesar. And it says that this land beast causes people to worship that political sea beast. I'm just so glad that we've left all of this behind in the past. We don't have any problems of corrupted religiosity or corrupted political power that seeks to destroy the people of God. Like, this is all, way in the past. We don't got to deal with that anymore, right? I'm being facetious, obviously. But these are things that bring comfort to us today. While what we experience today takes on a different form than what's going on here, we can take wisdom from this, to have discernment, like John is encouraging them, to persevere and then to have understanding on how to discern what is the right way to worship, what does the Lamb actually look like, and who is actually just acting like the Lamb but talking like the dragon. You've got to have those ears to hear. And so then, chapter 14, you have a moment of hope again, where you see the Lamb standing on Mount Zion in verse 1. And he's got his army, and it's like, there it is. This is another one of those throne scenes. It's like we saw the dragon and his minions, but the Lamb's with his army standing on the mountain. And that's all of us. This is all of us. As we gather here, we participate in the victory of the Lamb every day when we meet here. Every first day of the week, and as we go out from here, we're this army of the Lamb. All of us right now, defeating and destroying the enemies of God, the dragon, the beast, and his minions. And so then we have another 7 moments of judgment. Here in chapters 15 and 16, there are 7 bowls of wrath. And these ones are, it says, the final judgments. After this, everything is completed and destroyed. And then what he sees in chapters 17 and 18, if you turn over, is right after that last bowl is poured, he sees Babylon the Great, or the Babylon the harlot, this corrupted woman who's sitting on one of those beasts that came up out of the sea, and it's like she's trampling the people of God, and she looks beautiful. She's got a gold cup, but what is she drinking in her cup? She's drinking the blood of the saints. And so while it looks good and it looks like something that should be John even has a moment, if you look in verse 6, he marvels at the woman on the beast, and the angel is like, don't marvel at this. She's not a thing to be admired. Because immediately in chapter 18, thrown down and destroyed. Her judgment is brought upon her, and the judgment is completed. And so then, chapters 19 and 20, as I said, this is where we see the final victory of God. We visit the throne again. The marriage supper of the Lamb is declared in verses 7 and 8. And then in verse 11, it says, I saw the heavens open. This is 19 verse 11. The heavens opened, and behold, a white horse. And the one who sits on it is faithful and true, and in righteousness he judges and wages war. And then it sounds like Jesus from chapter 1. His eyes are a flame of fire. His head has many crowns, complete authority and dominion by all those crowns. And then he has a name that's written on him that no one knows but himself. And look at how his clothing is described. He had those white robes in chapter 1. It says, but he's wearing a garment that's dipped in blood, and his name is the Word of God. So he's riding into battle right now, but he has blood on his garments. So whose blood is he riding into victory with? If the battle hasn't happened yet, whose blood is this? I propose that it's his own. This is the victory of the Lamb, right? The Lamb that was slain, that was bleeding, but that blood in that sacrifice is how he obtains the victory, and how we can also obtain the victory too. And then concluding in chapter 21, it's the final, it's kind of everything's reaching its conclusion. Both those beasts, the one that came up from the land, the one that came up from the sea, are thrown into the lake of fire, and then the dragon is thrown in after them. And then it says in verses 11 through 15, we visit the great white throne from chapters 4 and 5 one last time, and it says, everyone is brought into judgment, and those whose name were not written in the book of life were thrown with the dragon, with the beast, into the lake of fire, which is the second death, the lake of fire. Anyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. And then finally, the last 2 chapters, it's a beautiful new beginning. Because I've done this little fun free Bible study advice tip, something, whatever, before, but a fun little study sometime is read Genesis 1 through 3, read Revelation 21 and 22, and just write down all the repeated words or reversed words. So the curse began in chapter 3, what we find in this city that we sang about just a few minutes ago, is there's no more curse. And the beautiful city, it says, chapter 21 and verse 1, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, being ready as a bride adorned for her husband. And then I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he will dwell among them. They shall be his people, and God himself will be among them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will no longer be any death, no longer be any mourning or crying, for the first things have passed away. And then the one that sits on the throne said, Behold, I'm making all things new. And he said, Write this down, for these words are faithful and true. And so it's kind of like this moment of climactic conclusion where that one on the throne is making all things new. It's the new hopeful beginning. It's the end of the story, but it's a new beginning. And then as you reach the end of the book in chapter 22, it's this beautiful moment where John sees Jesus one last time in verse 20 and says, He who bears witness of these things says, Yes, I am coming quickly. And then says, Amen. Come, Lord Jesus. The grace of the Lord Jesus be with you all. Amen. How you guys doing? Everyone still there? Still in? This afternoon, Bryce said he fell asleep during my last sermon. So hope you're still there, Bryce. I know you are. I believe you do. But there it is. If you need to go back and listen to this again, and dive through it, feel free. These are all recorded online. But this is the grand conclusion of the whole story of the Bible. And then we're going to end it with just the takeaways of as you go into this on your own, seriously, read it aloud on your own. This is a beautiful gift that's been preserved for us to have wisdom and encouragement today. And one of those encouragements is to hold on. Don't give in. The beast, the dragon, the powers of the world are seeking to trample the people of God, to deceive us, to make us go astray, and to worship the beast and his images. But we serve the Lamb. We serve the sacrificed Lamb, who he's the one that is worthy of praise. And 2 times in the book, there's kind of these moments where, and it's not just 2 times, there's many times, these are just a sampling, where Jesus speaks to the people. And this first one is in chapter 2, during one of the letters. He says, hold fast. He says, hold fast to what you believe. So many times he repeats in those letters, stay true, hold fast, hold on. I know you're going through it right now. I know you're receiving persecution. He says, hold on, persevere. 7 times, the perseverance of the saints, that phrase appears. And here he says, hold fast. And then in chapter 6, the ones who have been martyred for him, he gives them white robes and he says, hold on a little longer, because they're crying out, how long? Until you return, until you come back. And he says, just hold on a little while longer. And I'm coming quickly, he says there at the very end. So hold on, don't give in. And beware of the monster or monsters. Because it was kind of interesting when if you draw it out. Do I want to use multiple colors? No, I don't. I won't. But right, you had the great red dragon, right? This is the dragon. All right, roll with it. This is the dragon. And then you had the sea and the land, and there were these monsters. Yeah. Roll with it, y'all. All right. These 2 monsters that came up out of the sea and out of the land, and they get their power from the dragon. It's like an unholy trinity that we're dealing with here. These monsters, that there's a power, one in the heavens, and there's 2 down here on the earth. They're deceptive. They're trying to deceive the people of God. They're trying to devour. The monster imagery is so true. When humans act in a way that is in service to the dragon, service to Satan, to service to the powers that are against life, against love, against God, we act like animals. We act like beasts. I mean, we could go back to that political cartoon where we're fed fear and dissension and hate and disgust for people. Our enemy is never flesh and blood. Our enemy is never another human. And so beware the deceptive monster. Twice, Jesus says to his church, he's like, there are some of those churches that were kind of cozying up to the political powers of their day, cozying up to Rome and being like, it's not a bad thing if we just burn a little incense to Caesar so we can trade in the markets. He's like, no, don't do that. And then right in the middle of chapter 16, during some of the judgments, he says, hey, beware. Like, you're not above this. Like, even if you're a part of my body, if you start serving the beast, this is going to happen to you too. He says, beware. Stay awake. Be alert. So beware of the monster. But then, of course, victory is secure. Like, the Lamb has conquered. The Lamb has overcome. He's opened the seal. He's done everything for us that we could not do for ourselves. Give yourselves to him. There's a reason John put that scene of the throne in chapters 4 and 5 right at the beginning. God gave him that first so that we could just revisit that confidence throughout every terror, every terrifying and scary thing that we encounter along the way. If we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we won't fear any evil because our good shepherd is shepherding us. And who is our shepherd? He's a lamb. And that's a lamb that was slain. And so all of us participate in that victory. This is like to give us something to go out and to go do, to be a part of this victory of the Lamb, and to walk in a way that's contrary to the way the world looks. Like, it looks like everything's decaying and dying, but we serve the one who is making all things new. And he started that within us, and he's doing that through us out into the world. So the victory is secure. And then lastly, look to the Lamb. Keep your eyes on Jesus. It's a beautiful beginning and end to this vision. In chapter 4, verse 1, remember what John hears? He says he heard the voice of one calling out from that door that was open in heaven. He said it was that first voice that called to me. So who was calling out to John at the beginning of the vision? Jesus was. And he said, hey, come up here, and I'll show you things that must take place. And how does it end in chapter 22, verse 20? John, down here on earth, calling up to Jesus, saying, Lord, come quickly. It begins and ends with the two beloved ones. Remember, John's the beloved disciple. Jesus calling to John, come up here. John calling to Jesus, hey, come quickly. There's only one other book of the Bible that begins and ends that way, of two lovers calling to each other to come quickly. The Song of Solomon. It's like this, in its whole entirety, is a story about a loving relationship between God and his creation. And it begins with him calling out in love to, hey, come up here. And then it ends with John saying, hey, come quickly, come down here. And it's the two beloved ones, and that's all of us. So may our prayer also be, Lord, come quickly. Like, we need you. We need you here, we need you now. And we need to have that healing and that victory of that great city where the tree of life is restored. The tree of life is only mentioned in 3 books of the Bible. Proverbs, Genesis, and here in the Revelation. And we get that tree back, that life of God back forever and ever. At the very end, to those who hold fast, to those who have persevered, to those who have avoided the deceit of the dragon and the monsters, and that have hold fast to the Lamb. That's what Revelation is all about. It's a story of encouragement, and it's a story of love. That God has sent his Son to rescue us in his sacrifice, that then we can know how to find the way back to him. And so that's where we will end it here tonight. So this story of victory is open to everyone. If you're not in the Messiah Jesus, like, tonight's the night, now is the time. Now is the day to be joined to him in baptism and then continue on this journey and holding fast and following the Lamb wherever he goes as he leads us into victory forever and ever. And if there's someone who you've been, to use the imagery of the Revelation, you've been deceived by the dragon, you've been deceived by the beast, and you've served their and worshipped their image, now's the time to get back on track as well. Serve the Lamb, follow the Lamb wherever he goes. And if there's anyone here tonight who needs to respond to that call, would you please come as we stand and as we sing.